Driving adoption of your intranet with workflow and forms. We're just waiting for a few more people to join us. So the webinar will start in a couple of minutes. In the meantime, please hang tight and we'll get going very, very shortly. Good morning. So why don't we begin? So once again, thank you so much for joining us in this webinar series. This webinar is called Driving Adoption of Your Intranet with Workflows and Forms, using one of our favorite products that we use here, both at Bonsai and at Dynamic Hour Consulting, called Nintex Workflow. So for today's agenda, we're going to do a little bit of brief introductions first with myself and my co-host Mike Watt. Then we'll talk about some of the challenges we're seeing from an intranet perspective, really keeping staff engaged. So this webinar really is kind of a two-stage sort of webinar. So we're going to talk a little bit around intranets on SharePoint and a little bit around the product that we have here at Bonsai. But the other thing that we'll also talk about, and it's going to comprise the majority of the presentation, is really how do you leverage your intranet to engage your staff using forms and automated workflow. Working with a lot of customers using Bonsai, we're finding that a great way to get engagement of your intranet is to provide them the tools and resources that they need to do their job. And what better way there is to do that than providing them with automated forms and workflow capabilities. So after we talk about keeping staff engaged, we'll talk about making forms appealing and findable, and then the last thing we're going to talk about is turning the intranet into a digital workplace with some workflow automation. And once again, the tool that we're going to use and talk about today is our favorite workflow tool here, Nintex Forms and Workflow. Now, if you have any questions during this webinar, you can always put up your hand from the GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar panel. So we do ask and we do like to have a whole bunch of interaction within these. There's a whole bunch of people on the call. But once again, if you have any questions for myself and Mike, please feel free to stop us at any point in time. So a little bit of introductions around who we are. So we are a consulting company here based out of Vancouver, Canada. We're one of the few consulting companies around the world that specialize only in SharePoint. We're a Microsoft Gold partner performing end-to-end implementations of SharePoint and Office 365. A couple of things that make Dynamic Hour different. We're one of the few companies with 3 SharePoint MVPs on staff, so obviously some really smart people here. But in addition to working a lot with clients with intranets for our intranet project or product, which I'll talk about shortly, one of our main areas of focus as well is forms and workflow. We are a Nintex partner, and in addition to that, in 2014, we were fortunate enough to win the Solution Innovation Award for North America for one of the solutions that we developed using Nintex Forms and Workflow. And Mike will talk about that a little bit later on in time. So in addition to being a consulting company, we also have a product. So we have an intranet product that's called Bonsai Intranet for SharePoint. And what Bonsai allows you to do is to create a really beautiful intranet out of the box very, very quickly, providing all of those core intranet capabilities that an organization may need. So we're going to show you a little bit of that today, but really what we're going to show you is how you can essentially integrate your intranet and forms and workflow together in a way that makes sense for your end users. So not only are you providing your users typical intranet elements like news and events and maybe finding people, but in addition to that, you're also going to have, we're also going to show you how to embed Nintex Forms and Workflow directly into your intranet so you can drive some real great engagement and some real great adoption. So my name is Michael Pisarek. I'm one of the founders here of Dynamic Our Consulting and the Director of Product at Bonsai Intranet. I'm a 5 times Microsoft SharePoint MVP. I've been working with SharePoint for a number of years now, and really love the SharePoint space, really love the SharePoint intranet space as well. If you have any questions for me or any feedback, once again, please feel free to get in touch with me through Twitter or through our emails, which will be at the end of the presentation. But we're always super happy to help clients and even people with questions. If you've got any questions, like I said, feel free to reach out to myself. And joining me this morning is...
Hi, I'm Mike Watt. I'm a SharePoint and BI analyst with Dynamic Owl, as well as being one of the main product consultants on the Bonsai solution delivery team. One of my specialties with DO is working with clients to do forms, workflow, and business automation solutions. And so as Michael alluded to, we will be talking near the end of the presentation about that award-winning solution that we built for one of our engineering geotechnical consultants. And I was the primary project lead on that particular initiative. So I'll be providing some of the technical expertise on the call here. And like Michael said, please feel free at any point. We're more than happy to take questions about any of the material that we're covering. The demos today are going to be quite surface level in terms of what Nintex can offer. It's a very deep platform, so we are very interested in talking later on about any extended use cases that you might have. Back to you, Michael.
Perfect. So before we do that, let's do a little bit of a poll if we can get this going. Once again, we like to keep this interactive. So let's start this poll here now. So I'm going to launch this, so you should see this coming up in your screen there. So the poll is really, what intranet platform are you using? Whether you're using SharePoint on-premise, or whether you're using Office 365, for instance, or maybe another platform vendor, or you don't know, or you don't have a current intranet. That might be for some of those people. So it looks like SharePoint on-premise is winning here. Oh, Office 365 is making a comeback as well. So let's just see how we go here. We'll leave it open for another kind of 30 seconds. Interestingly enough, no one else is using another platform vendor, and everyone seems to know what platform they're using, which is really great. And everyone seems to have an intranet out of all of the people on here. So that's probably a really, really good thing as well. So a couple more seconds here, and we'll just stop this poll. Okay, so it looks like pretty even split here, Mike, between SharePoint on-prem and Office 365, which is definitely something that we are seeing a lot out there. A lot of our customers are still using on-premise SharePoint. I know that Microsoft wants everyone to go to the cloud, so don't feel bad if you're not doing that. But a pretty good split. So 55% to SharePoint on-prem and 45% to Office 365. Okay, so let's get stuck into the presentation. So let's talk about the intranet challenge around really engagement and productivity. So one of the main core use cases, or one of the main things we're seeing from organizations that we work with, is using their intranet to engage employees. And typically what we found in the last couple of years when we're working with clients with Bonsai, that employee engagement story for their intranet was the first thing that users were really interested in. So being able to provide a centralized way to access news or events, for instance. But what we've found over the last 6 months or 12 months really working with customers is not only do they want their intranet to be an information source, but they also want their intranet to increase productivity. Now, from an engagement perspective, engaged employees really do matter. There's a whole range of research that has been done in terms of how engaged or disengaged the workforce is. Now, when you think about it from an intranet perspective, the way that you can gain engagement with your organization from an intranet perspective is things like providing a centralized way to promote news stories or events, or maybe a way to show new starters within the organization. But in addition to that, engagement from an intranet perspective can really be driven by some of the social tools and capabilities that we're seeing. So things like comments and liking and sharing really help employees feel like they're part of an organization. Now, in addition to engagement, organizations have a whole range of challenges that they're facing, whether that's providing trusted information, whether that's fostering staff engagement like we've talked about, streamlining of business processes, getting access to various tools to do their jobs, helping onboarding. All of these items where we're speaking to customers are really common organizational challenges that we're finding are applicable to all companies that we work with. Now, SharePoint out of the box is a great platform, but a lot of organizations are seeing or want to use SharePoint as an intranet platform to kind of streamline a lot of these processes, but also to manage a lot of these organizational challenges. So when we talk about an intranet, as you know, if you've used SharePoint, SharePoint really isn't an intranet platform out of the box. It provides a whole range of capabilities there. But what we find when we speak to customers is there's a whole range of intranet capabilities that customers are looking for. And if we look at common intranet features, they fall what we think into kind of these 4 or 5 intranet pillars that we talk about. So the first pillar is around communication. A great intranet from an engagement perspective, but also from an organizational perspective, should provide news or events to different users within your organization, the ability to spotlight maybe new starters or stories, and even types of announcements. So really that communication piece of intranets is very, very key. In addition to that, there's a content pillar. So a great intranet should provide basic document management. It should provide users finalized versions of common content that they're using on a day-to-day basis. So forms, policies, procedures, any type of collateral that users will be looking. In addition, from a content perspective, maybe you want your intranet to target content to specific users. So one of the things we do with Bonsai is we allow you to target content to specific groups of users. So instead of sending things out via email, for instance, users can go onto their intranet and see a very customized experience for them. Now, in addition to those kind of static communication content types, the other thing we're seeing is around tasks and tools. So not only do you want your intranet to be an information source, but you want your intranet to help you do stuff as an employee. So tasks and tools is really around finding people through an employee search or a location directory, or maybe a listing of SharePoint sites or a forms directory. There's a whole range of social and engagement features as well, things like comments, liking, sharing, and marketplace, and also user experience. We know, working with SharePoint, that the out-of-the-box user experience isn't particularly great, and especially when someone is an intranet user and not a technical expert in SharePoint, that user experience can fall down. So let's tour a bit of an intranet now. So let me just swap over here. So let's look at Bank Group here. So this is Bank Group. This is an example of an intranet that we create with our Bonsai platform. And like I said, if you're interested, you can definitely feel free to get in touch with us. But Bank Group is kind of a banking client that we use as an example. And this, you can tell, looks like nothing like out-of-the-box SharePoint, first of all. So with our Bonsai platform, it can literally have an intranet up and running for you in about 2 hours, and this is how it would look. But when we talk about things from an engagement perspective, we have all of those common elements that you might need as a user. So the first thing we have is all of our news stories through here. So as a user, I can click through these particular stories. Maybe they're featured stories, or maybe they're kind of latest articles through here. If I click on here and I'm interested in a particular news story, instead of seeing an out-of-the-box SharePoint page, we kind of give users this really beautiful experience here of being able to see a news story here. We've got people integrated in through Skype for Business here. We can see, obviously, the content of the news. We can see any comments, so some of these social features are some of the things that we've talked about here as well. So being able to actually engage users through things like comments and liking and sharing. But in addition to news, what we're finding as well is from a productivity perspective, there's other elements that people are looking for. So it's great that I can go to my intranet and find things like news and events and maybe reports. But obviously there's other things that I'm typically looking for. And one of those things is around directories. So once again, most of the organizations that we work with have a few types of directories. So whether it's an area within my organization to find locations. In this case, Bank Group has a number of offices here. Imagine for your organization, I have a beautiful location directory here. We have this nice little type ahead search here. So this is all custom to kind of the Bonsai product. The other type of directory that we have is also around employees. So once again, finding employees is a key thing. We know that finding them through out-of-the-box SharePoint isn't particularly great. So we kind of have our own employee directory experience that we've created through here. So you can do some really simple things. So whether I'm filtering for people by last name, so here's all the people maybe starting with J, or here's all the people starting with M. When I find someone, I typically want to get in contact with them. I can just click open this card and get all of their contact details. But the other thing that we've tried to do with Bonsai as well is to give this kind of type ahead search experience. So as soon as I start typing in someone's name, we try to suggest search results for you. So we try to make it very simple and very easy to find things. But the final thing, as we talked about from an engagement perspective, is giving people access to various tasks or tools to be able to perform their job. And one of the ways that we're seeing that is around forms and workflow. Now, Mike is going to talk about forms and workflow in just a moment, but there's a couple of ways that we do that within Bonsai for a lot of our clients. So whether that's something like submitting an expense claim through here, and what we're going to do, we're going to open up a page here. Now, what you'll find, and might go through this, is we've kind of got the Bonsai Chrome through here, but we've actually got a Nintex form embedded directly within here. We'll talk about that. But the other part that we're also very keen on, and a lot of organizations are very keen on, is maybe giving a search-driven experience for all of the forms that an organization may have. So this is what we call our document portal experience. And this allows you as a user to go search for various types of documents. I can use the refiners here to find content. I have live previews. I've got favoriting as well, which is all individual. So as a user, I can have my own list of individualized favorites. And I also have this kind of really nice type ahead search experience here that we have developed. So as you can see, this is a really quick tour, but integrating forms and workflow into an intranet really helps move an organization, not just from an intranet, but from what we call to a digital workplace. And that's what we're trying to get to, with a lot of our clients. So there's a journey now that organizations are going through, and that journey is from the intranet to the digital workplace. And typical intranets were around news and announcements and web pages and static documents. But as we move along this kind of line, we start to put in things like self-service forms and workflows, maybe some gamification elements, and so forth. But for us, and what Mike's going to talk about today, is we feel there's a huge amount of value there with self-service forms and workflow. Not only is it great from a user perspective, but for those of you that are trying to get maybe funding for a new intranet project, it's a very quick and very simple way to be able to justify the cost of your new intranet project, but also drive adoption of your intranet.
All right, so we're just going to launch our second poll here to get a little bit of an understanding for the audience just before we go into the second section here. So this poll is related to your organization's ownership and usage of Nintex and the Nintex product platform suite. So just a couple of different options here. Do you own it? And if so, how extensively do you use it? And obviously the last one being no, but we're interested in looking at it. So it looks like a majority are split between extensive use and not currently owning, but interested in evaluating. Nintex does offer a broad range of licensing levels, both on-prem and on Office 365. So if there's any questions at the end of the presentation related to licensing Nintex and how you can get it within your organization, Michael and I are both happy to speak about that. But it looks like we've got a good mixture with the majority of today's attendees actually having Nintex licensed in some capacity in their SharePoint environment. So that's fantastic. Let's move on, and let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's presentation. So specifically, how are we going to drive an employee to the intranet with an attractive and usable forms-based environment that moves us away from the default experience that an individual is going to get in SharePoint, either on-prem or on O365. So specifically, we have a couple of goals. As Michael was alluding to, our real challenge here is to provide individuals with a digital workplace experience. We want them to have a kiosk feel and for the intranet to really feel like it's oriented around tasks. And specifically, if you've been through an intranet overhaul in the last 5 or 6 years, you've probably heard that the direction of intranet information architecture, of intranet design, is really to move away from content ownership of particular items. So the previous intranets most companies had would have been heavily departmentally oriented, rather. The information is siloed. An individual needs to know who is creating the material to be able to drive down to the location to find a particular form, document, ask a specific question, etc. So what we really want to do is provide a kiosk view where the employee feels like the intranet is designed around them and is designed around the common tasks that they might need to engage in, rather than around the silos in the organization that are actually administering or producing those tasks. Obviously, the second element that we want, and it's a little bit more glossy here, is that since most of us do seem to have SharePoint intranets of one flavor or another, there is a real need to minimize users' exposure to the SharePoint interface as much as possible. I've worked in organizations where SharePoint is a 4-letter word. Not a lot of people, especially when you're communicating with marketing or comms, not a lot of people are going to look at you favorably if you suggest SharePoint as a viable, modern, attractive front-end interface for their intranet. But we're here to show you that you can do that, and you can integrate business functionality into that intranet site. And we believe very strongly that Nintex is the way to do that. And so specifically from the forms context, how do we, at DO and with Nintex, how do we make that happen within Bonsai? And to do that, and Michael demoed that very briefly, but we'll pick apart each of those elements that we've gone through. We're looking at a branded form searching experience. We're looking at embedding forms directly within web parts in publishing pages rather than having users interact with lists. We're looking at centralizing approvals and tasks, which we'll talk about a little bit later within one of our follow-up sections. And then obviously we want to leverage global CSS styles as much as possible to make the forms look very similar to our overall organizational theme. So structuring forms on your intranet. One of the key challenges that I alluded to in the previous slide was this concern around siloing of content and information really being stored in a location that's not necessarily obvious to your users. So a good intranet and a good information architecture is going to start by thinking about the use cases that your users have when they access your intranet site. So from a forms perspective, are individuals really thinking about who owns the form, or do they associate it with a task that they need to complete? In terms of showing the actual material, we want to highlight how it's possible to embed forms, but also to roll up applicable forms onto various landing pages, topic-oriented pages, and really ensure that your intranet and your forms publishing approach is following the best practices model, where something is created once and managed in one location, but is surfaced in all the different relevant locations that your users might think about encountering that content. And so specifically to do that, from a SharePoint perspective, we heavily leverage our own Bonsai web part rollups, and we also leverage search because SharePoint search provides us the capabilities to aggregate content from across different lists, libraries, different sites, even different site collections across the organization. So really breaking down those organizational silos, but still making sure that the content respects the security that your organization has placed on specific forms or pieces of documentation, and also that your users are able to dive into material in a quick and really relevant fashion. So especially around something that is as important to the organization as forms, you really need an ability for users to separate out the wheat from the chaff very, very quickly. So you want them to be able to see the information faceted or filtered by various different attributes that they might think of when they're navigating to find a specific form. So we're hoping to reduce a user's blind entry of keywords into a search field and actually provide them association with relevant pieces of information through a refinement and a targeting experience. And again, all of that is really back-ended by SharePoint's built-in search technology, but what Bonsai and Nintex provide you is the ability to make that into a much more attractive and usable tool set. So let's take a look at the Forms portal here for a second. Michael demoed this a couple of minutes ago, but the Forms portal is a search-driven experience that uses custom Bonsai display templates that are sitting on top of a search result that is, or a search results experience that's pulling content from across our demo bank group farm. Most importantly, the material that's shown in this Forms portal is actually pre-targeted. So when I, as a user, land on this particular portal experience, as I said, the material is actually restricted by my security clearance. It can also be automatically filtered to prevent me from seeing material that's not relevant to my region. So many of us work for organizations that span multiple countries, even multiple continents. And there's a large amount of policy, procedural, administrative material that is not relevant to specific individuals across these boundaries within our overall parent companies. And so being able to really restrict this information to prevent it from appearing for users is key to exposing them to the most relevant content immediately. We also want to give the users an attractive, modern UX feel. So we're going to leverage things like type-ahead search filtering. We're going to use personalized favorites. And all of this should give you a nice centralized location for your users to experience all the Forms content across the entire organization. So if I come into the Forms portal here, what we have on the left-hand side here is a refinement experience using SharePoint metadata. So let's say that I'm an individual who's looking for internal employee administration forms. I simply need to take the categorization filter, click on that, and I receive the short list of particular forms that I might be interested here. I can favorite this item. It appears here in my favorites for me to launch in a quick fashion the next time I arrive here. And most importantly, you can see that if I remove the categorization, we have a mixture of different document types that are contained within this portal-driven experience. So it's important to understand that an organization's Forms assets are really, they are an always maturing, always evolving asset within the company. And it may be that you are within a 3 to 5 year initiative to digitize a lot of your forms, but that there is actually a fair amount of content within your intranet, within the company as a whole, that's still paper-based at this point. So those may be Word documents or PDFs that don't have any rich functionality with them. and simply need to be accessed by the user so they can print them and send them to the appropriate parties. Obviously, from our perspective, we really want to move away from that as fast as possible, but some of these departments, some of these initiatives do take quite significant amount of investment and a quite significant amount of time. So a portal experience like this really abstracts to the user what is actually happening on the back end. The user really doesn't care whether this is a digital form that is delivered via Nintex, whether it's an offline form that is accessible via Word. Really, it isn't important to them at that point. They simply get the title, the description, why they might possibly leverage this, and then a quick drive into that particular piece of content. So to protect yourself from these changes that are occurring, and to allow users to continue to come back to the same experience time and time again while you update your forms assets in the back end, a portal-driven, a search-driven experience like this is actually an excellent asset for the company and for your intranet. And we feel that this is an excellent addition to your overall intranet platform. For the clients that have deployed this document portal, this forms portal experience, this has been one of the most well-received aspects of their new intranet initiative, and we continue to do a significant amount of new development and functionality within this space. Let me just get back into the presentation here, and let's get to another aspect of the Nintex platform. So if you have SharePoint for an intranet, you've probably experienced the relatively jarring transition between an attractive branded landing page for a department or a communications portal type experience, and then you've clicked on a link and your browsing experience has been taken into a SharePoint list or an out-of-the-box SharePoint or InfoPath form, and it really has been a pretty jarring transition between a branded web experience and something that looks like it was architected about 15 years ago. So with Nintex, we have the ability to create these lists. They are still back-ended by SharePoint SharePoint lists rather, and the forms are then surfaced in a web part that prevents the user from knowing at all what is appearing or what is occurring on the back end of this process. So crucially, this requires no development knowledge for individuals to create these forms. We can leverage global CSS across the entire stack so that our forms are actually styled in a particular fashion rather than needing to hand roll the branding ourselves. And once we've actually completed the form, we can simply embed that content directly onto a SharePoint publishing page, and that, as I said, completely abstracts the user's experience from the SharePoint layer whatsoever. So if I go back to my portal experience and I click on the expense claim submission here, so I've just traversed from my portal to a branded Nintex form that is occurring within my intranet overall Chrome here. And if I then take a look at the page design here, I can edit the page and take a look at the construction, how we've actually built this particular page architecturally. And that, oh, apologies, it looks like we may have a bit of a technical issue here. 1 second. There we go. Okay. Edit. Okay. So the SharePoint publishing pages give us the option of creating list and other Bonsai web parts that are going to pull in content from various different locations across the organization. And if I add a web part in here, you're going to see the various different web part features that we have within this demo site. So obviously, from a Bonsai perspective, we include a number of different web parts that you can use to roll up content across your organization. But what we really want to highlight in the demo today is a couple of different web parts that come out of the box with Nintex, and that we would recommend that you heavily leverage in terms of improving your user's experience with the Nintex platform. So specifically here, we're using the Nintex Forms list form web part. And if we go into the properties of this list form web part and we take a look at the edit here, all that we've done, and again, it's extremely simple. We haven't needed to provide any developer knowledge. I haven't needed to go into SharePoint Designer at all to architect this. I've simply indicated that when this page launches, I want the page to launch with a new form format rather than an edit form. I could, if I used edit or display, pass in some URL parameters to allow this to actually load an instance of a previously submitted form. So again, to prevent your users from needing to browse that list experience, you can surface their previously submitted forms in this format rather than having them go down into the SharePoint experience. But in here, what we wanted to do is create a portlet for the user to submit a new request. So I have a new form submission. I've told it which list that I want this to target. Notice that I could have targeted a completely separate site URL from where this page is currently published. So I'm not restricted to operating within lists that are contained on this particular site. And then if I go down into the details here, obviously this is for more complex publishing scenarios where I have multiple content types against this specific list or library. So I can target a particular content type for this particular form to launch. So that's essentially the entire functionality that we've leveraged here within that form, or that web part, sorry. And the result of that is that what we actually architected in the back end, so when I go to site contents here, so now we're in the SharePoint experience, when I go to site contents and I take a look at my list and I go into my Nintex experience and I customize the form here, the form that I've architected for the desktop experience view is just a very, very basic repeating section, a couple of comments areas, a bit of business logic with the rules. Again, nothing extraordinary here. But once I finish publishing that through the Nintex WYSIWYG interface, again, an interface that requires no development knowledge and that allows me to do things like drag and drop new fields instantaneously, as soon as I've done that, this web part will actually surface that resulting form directly into the page view. When I save it, I'm going to get redirected back to the landing page of my site, so I can simply create a little bit of content in here. I can agree, I can do some attachments. Now, this again is an extraordinarily simple Nintex form. But Nintex does offer a broad range of additional enterprise-level functionality. So elements that we could have included in here, for example, would be to reach out to external third-party data sources like SQL or Microsoft Dynamics, and actually embed that content directly into the form. I can pull web service requests. I can take the results of this information and then I can trigger workflows or actually write it within documentation. This is really just the very, very surface and the very beginning of what kind of processes you can automate from a business perspective. But it is, I think, relatively evident that it is a much better, much more attractive and branded experience compared to the normal SharePoint out-of-the-box functionality. So let's go back into the presentation for a second, and we'll continue with a bit of a chat about trying to change an intranet into your digital workplace. So as Michael was discussing, one of the real challenges that we're facing in the intranet space is to justify and continue to demonstrate that the intranet is a relevant and critical piece of business functionality within the overall organization. And the business landscape today is actually changing immensely from what it was 5, 10 years ago, our users have very different expectations of what a corporate tool will provide to them, and they have a different level of expectation around what technology can actually perform, mostly because they've been exposed to a wide array of consumer-level devices which have excellent UX experiences. Things like tablets and smartphones, applications developed exclusively for the mobile space. All of this is really raising the bar in terms of what our employees are expecting out of an intranet. And so what was acceptable in the intranet space even 5 years ago, a corporate portal that was publishing information from the organization to the end users for them to consume only at their desk, only while they were within the corporate LAN rather than from mobile devices. This is really no longer the case, and we really need to make sure that our intranet is accessible across a wide range of different devices, and that it is, as we need to put it with Bonsai, it is mobile first and BYOD ready. So the challenge for that, obviously, is that SharePoint and InfoPath make this particular challenge with your intranet and with Forms a particularly challenging issue to resolve. If anybody has had InfoPath development experience or worked on an InfoPath project, making those forms into mobile-friendly experiences, it's something that really inspires a lot of hair pulling, a lot of projects going significantly over budget. It really isn't a pleasurable experience whatsoever. So what Nintex can offer from this perspective in terms of making your intranet and your forms and your workflows accessible is a two-pronged strategy, really. First of all, we have a native forms with device targeting experience. So I'll show that to you in a little bit when we go into the editing experience for the expense form. But this allows us to actually pre-create different forms experiences depending on the type of browser that the individual is arriving at the intranet with. So if they have a desktop browser, we obviously have a full-width, full desktop-oriented form. If they have a tablet or a smartphone device, we can actually reformat and present a completely different view of the same form to them. But more importantly than that, we feel, and this is something that we've actually been working extensively with our clients on over the last couple of years, is a native mobile application stack that allows you to actually seamlessly move your intranet and tasks from a desktop experience out to native mobile applications. And that really solves the major challenge that we have, which is that a user's work tasks should be accessible from anywhere that they believe they want to work. And if we are supporting a BYOD type of environment, we need to make sure that those particular tasks, those actions, are following the individual around their different workspaces. So let's talk a little bit about the native applications. Nintex Mobile offers branded mobile device management deployed custom applications. If you don't want to put in the initial investment to actually create these custom applications, there is a default Nintex Mobile app that is downloadable from within each of the app stores. You just connect it to your tenant, and it's immediately accessible to surface the forms and tasks that have been published within Nintex Mobile View. It centralizes tasks and approvals that the user has or is participating in from across the entire farm. It provides rich offline functionality, so even if my devices are not connected at any particular time, I am still going to be able to submit things, submit forms, act on approvals, and then come right back to my intranet. And as soon as my connection is activated on my mobile device again, those actions will process and submit into SharePoint. It's fully integrated with your domain security, so users don't need to manage any additional logins. It simply ties into their Windows, or rather their Active Directory, whether it's Azure AD or on-prem AD, your domain credentials. And it's perfect, we feel, for a whole range of simple task applications that could be useful from an intranet perspective. So things like incident reporting, we've deployed a number of very basic solutions for clients within their intranets where you want to have a idea suggestion or incident reporting ingestion form, and the individual needs the ability to take a couple of photos about the particular item in question, submit it, and trigger a workflow. Obviously, from the Nintex stack, there have been a whole bunch of admin and HR type requests, so things like vacation leaves, expense approvals, printing formatting requests, all of these various different elements that flow through the company on a day-to-day basis, often resulting in the generation of some form of document, either to be archived or sent out to clients, or even the updating of information within a third-party payroll system, for example. Nintex can be an excellent broker for all of these, and the forms embedded within your intranet can be the gateway by which your employees access all of that functionality. So if you haven't played around with it yet, we really, really would encourage you to explore the capabilities of Nintex Mobile and bringing your intranet and your SharePoint forms and workflows down into your employees' devices. But we'd also like to highlight a couple of features that you may not be aware of from a Nintex perspective, which are, again, just out-of-the-box Nintex web parts that are accessible to make the intranet more of a clearinghouse for your forms and workflows as you try to make this task-oriented environment more of a reality within your intranet. So if I go to the My Tasks area here within the site, we have, again, this is just a standard SharePoint publishing page, and I have a list of popular forms and links on the right-hand side here. That's just one of the Bonsai web parts that's rolling up a couple of links to elsewhere within the environment. But more importantly, I have two out-of-the-box Nintex web parts that if I edit this page again, and we look at how we've actually constructed this, to highlight how simple this is, if I add a web part and I go into the Nintex Workflow 2013 web parts, what we've leveraged here is two different items, My Workflow Tasks and Workflows that I've started. And immediately, out of the box, you solved one of SharePoint's massive limitations, which is the centralization of tasks that are assigned to me across anywhere within the entire farm. Because if you've worked with SharePoint before, you know the challenge when an individual has 20 different task lists across the various different project sites that they're working with. And Nintex solves that in a single go with this particular task roll up here that gives you this handy drop-down item that I'd really like to just call out to your attention, because from a business utility perspective, this is absolutely massive. The ability for me to say, show me all of the activities that are awaiting my attention across my entire SharePoint farm. We've had clients for whom this one specific feature has actually sold them on the entire value proposition of the Nintex stack straight out. It was such a challenge for them to try and centralize their workflows for the individuals who were participating in their SharePoint project management sites. And this really just harmonized that to such a significant degree. We really feel that it's a huge value add. But I also wanted to highlight this second web part here, because this is an often overlooked but equally important challenge that individuals have within large organizations. When we're doing requirements gathering for digital workplaces, one of the most important challenges that we hear is, I have no idea where a particular request that I've started is currently. Who owns it? Who is it waiting on? Who do I need to follow up with if I need to move this to the next stage in the process? And to be able to deliver that at a glance across the entire organization is absolutely critical to providing this centralized My Tasks digital workplace environment. And so this workflows that I've started web part actually allows me to surface immediately any request that the user has engaged with, whether it's an expense submission, print request, whatever happens to have been triggered there. There's no configuration necessary whatsoever in here. So again, just really talking to that value proposition that Nintex brings to you. You do have the option, again, of working within a site collection, or entire farm scope. All of that will speak to, I think, a real sea change in the way that a lot of companies surface the approvals, tasks, business processes that they currently have. And being able to provide that particular view, that clearinghouse within your intranet, we feel is a significant value add for Nintex as well as for Bonsai overall. So we wanted to bring that to your attention. The Nintex Mobile applications do include this same centralized task and forms list approach. So they are not designed as a portlet into your entire SharePoint experience, but really to provide that digital workspace for your tasks and your forms as well. So working with an orientation like this, this is a digital workplace landing page. The mobile applications providing that landing page as well. We feel that that really takes your intranet to the next level in terms of that particular user's experience. Now, just to highlight very quickly what we've been talking about here and the depth to which the Nintex platform can go from a business use case perspective. Michael mentioned right at the beginning that we were the Partner Innovation Award winner for North America for 2014. And the winning solution that we delivered was for an engineering firm locally that required an end-to-end automation solution that took offline data that was collected in often very inaccessible mine and other resource extraction environments, forestry, pipelines, etc. Gathered that, sent it into the SharePoint stack for the data processing, the review by project management staff. Then obviously we had to close the loop, which was to generate official documentation that would be used for the production of a construction records report and various auditing requirements, which was then obviously delivered to the client. All of this is to just highlight that what we've demoed today is very, very simple. You know, it's an expense report form with a couple of different fields. It's a landing page that aggregates some basic tasks. The Nintex stack as a whole and the solutions that you can deliver to your clients and that you can deliver to your employees on the Nintex platform is very, very deep. It's very broad from a functionality perspective. And we find it's very pleasurable to work with. So we really enjoyed building the solution, putting it together. The client has loved it. They've turned it into a number of different solutions for different project sites, and they're going forward with additional investments within this technology. So that was just a shout out to some of the more advanced capabilities that you can achieve with Nintex within your intranet and your overall project management environment. Lastly, we just want to highlight from a value proposition perspective, Michael was alluding to the challenge of selling an intranet and the ROI justification around an intranet project. So Nintex has a ton of different material that they can provide as collateral, and this is only one of the examples that demonstrates some of the expected ROI savings that you can receive from automating even one standard business process. So when you're talking about justifying an intranet refresh and determining how you're going to move forward with this digital workplace initiative, taking a look at numbers like this, numbers that we're happy to provide to you in terms of a discussion later on after the webinar, this can really, really help drive that conversation internally within your organization. So, Michael, I think it's over to you for a bit of a Q&A period here. If we have any attendees on the meeting who'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the hands up feature and we can engage your audio. Otherwise, the next slide will be our contact information where you can reach us after the fact. And like Michael said, we'd be very happy to talk to you about any future intranet or forms and workflow initiatives that you might have. Thank you.
Awesome. So we'll just wait for a couple of minutes. You can see a couple of people typing in some questions. So feel free to use the chat feature as well down the bottom. That's probably the easiest way to add in a question through here. So I've got a question here. So Mike, I'll let you answer this. So what capabilities does Nintex Forms and Workflow have in terms of responsive design? So I think the question is really around, can you create a form in Nintex Forms and make it responsive?
Okay, yeah, good, excellent question there. So there's two different ways that you can really solve that. And if we go into the Nintex application here, you can, with no developer knowledge, take a look at the device channel targeting functionality, which is going to give you the option to immediately create a form of a different type depending on the user's browser style. So what we have here is the layout for a particular desktop form. If I wanted to create a form for a tablet style device, all I need to do here is come in and select, for example, the iPad form layout. It's going to rearrange my fields. I'm going to have to drag and drop them to different locations there, but that actually provides me an immediate view for different form types across the experience. Now, the other alternative that we can use there, and this is a little bit different and it's a bit more advanced and would require some development knowledge. Nintex Forms does support the embedding of any amount of integrated CSS, so you can actually alter the forms and their positioning of the elements to be responsive as well. So that is a possibility to look at. We find that most of our clients use the device targeting rather than going down the custom CSS route just from an investment standpoint. It's much simpler to achieve, but both of those options are definitely available for you if you wanted to leverage that. Great.
Perfect.
Thank you, Michael.
And just one more question here we have here as well. So in terms of forms, what would be the best way to structure forms in team sites as opposed to an intranet?
Right. So again, I think that speaks to our argument that really, when you deal with centralization of content from a search perspective, you don't really need to worry to a significant extent about how the forms are being organized within a particular team site area. So specifically, all you need to do is ensure that there is a very minimal amount of metadata so that there is a basic content type that is available for the page that surfaces that form, and that any metadata refiners that your organization has determined are necessary to roll up the forms at this organizational level rather than at the team site level are actually included on that content type as well. So you would federate out that content type using the hub. That would be available across all of the different team sites, and then you would inform your team site owners to publish that in that format. From our perspective, you really want to reduce the amount of metadata to no more than 2 or 3 choices. Otherwise, we find that we get a lot of blowback from content authors, and that really creates a bit of a challenge for the authoring experience. Thank you.
So that's all we have time for today. So once again, thank you so much for joining myself and Mike. If you have any questions around the webinar, around Nintex Forms and Workflow, around some of the intranet stuff that we talked about, we'll be more than happy to chat with you. So feel free to reach out to us, and also stay tuned as we will be doing many more webinars, both around Nintex and around Bonsai. So on behalf of Mike and myself, thank you so much for joining us. We know that taking an hour of your day is super valuable. So once again, thank you so much, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks, everyone.